Good morning, everyone. My name is Matt Winefield. Welcome to a UCLA event sponsored jointly by the Bruin Professionals and Real Estate Alumni Group of UCLA. I'm UCLA MBA class of 2000 and president of Winefield and Associates. We acquire environmentally impacted properties ranging from strip malls with gas stations and dry cleaners to industrial sites such as aerospace manufacturing properties. I will be moderating the next hour, and we have an NPR celebrity with us, Mary Childs, co-host of NPR's Planet Money podcast and author of Bond King. You could see Bond King. There we go. First, thank you to the consummate professionals, Jamie Edley of Bruin Professionals. I hope you're on today. And Peter Sapon of the Ziman Center. He was responsible for putting on this event. We had 80 RSVPs. Before some logistics and speaker introduction, a little more about our sponsors is in order. So Bruin Professionals is a UCLA business networking organization. It's run by the 3 C's, commerce, camaraderie, community. There are 12 regional networking chapters and 3 affinity groups. There are 6,000 subscribers on the BP Exchange Bulletin Board, great advertising reference. We also have a sponsor. We also sponsor an endowed scholarship, and we're about to provide a second scholarship with a fund exceeding $200,000, yes. And I moderate the BP Real Estate Affinity Group. So next, the Real Estate Alumni Group background. The UCLA REAG is comprised of alumni from various programs at UCLA, but predominantly the undergraduate programs, business school and law school. We have over 400 members with satellite groups in Orange County, San Diego, San Francisco, and New York. We sponsor exclusive and high-end real estate networking functions. We operate a job portal. We provide discounts on development tours, educational panels, and networking functions. And last but not least, REAG is strongly affiliated with the UCLA Ziman Center for Real Estate, an internationally recognized think tank which advances thought leadership in real estate by generating influential research, educating the next generation of leaders, and providing meaningful forums for industry professionals and policymakers. So everyone needs to know, this is one of the most important things I'm going to say today, is that there's Stanford v. UCLA tailgate a week from tomorrow at the Rose Bowl. We are 6-0, ranked something like 10th. It's wonderful. There's also a UCLA, that's on the 29th. There's also a UCLA Ziman Center Real Estate Mixer. It starts at 6:30 p.m. at Anderson. Thank God for real live events. That's November 8th. So some event logistics. This event is being recorded and it will be available on the REAG website in about 2 weeks. If you have questions while we're chatting, message me directly or put it in the Q&A box. And I will present them after I interact with Mary for about 40 minutes. So we're hoping to have 10 minutes for Q&A. And let's get right into it. I'd like to give a little background about Mary Childs. She's the co-host of NPR's Planet Money podcast and author of Bond King, How One Man Made a Market, Built an Empire, and Lost It All. And before joining Planet Money, the Planet Money team in 2019, she was a senior reporter at Barron's magazine, where she covered the alternatives industry, the bond market, and capitalism. Before that, she worked at the Financial Times and Bloomberg News. She's written about the pioneering of new asset classes like time, billionaires' proposals to solve inequality and diversity and discrimination in the finance industry. Before all that, she was also a Watson Fellow, spending a year traveling the world painting portraits. Check out her artwork at marychilds.com. I think you'll enjoy it. I may buy something. She graduated from Washington Lee University in Lexington, Virginia, with a degree in business journalism and an honors thesis comparing the use and significance of media sting operations in the US and India. I'd love to read that. Welcome, Mary Childs. Please tell us a bit about Planet Money. I was listening to some of their podcasts while coming from Yosemite on the I-5, thoroughly enjoyable. I think I listened to 5 of them and not a dull moment.
Nice. Oh, I'm so glad to hear that. Yeah, so Planet Money is actually one of the earlier podcasts. I think we were a spin out from This American Life in the financial crisis. Obviously, I wasn't there at the time, but the basic gist of it is, there are these invisible forces, these unseen forces that command so much influence and power in our world. And a lot of times they seem totally impenetrable. And frankly, it's kind of also the founding, the kind of engine motivation behind me writing this book as well, where it's like, for some reason, there's just a moat between us, normal people. I guess not us, the audience, because us, the audience, is on the other side of the island in a lot of cases where you understand this stuff and you speak the language and you know what MBS stands for and you can kind of move through that world with some ease and alacrity. Whereas I think for a lot of people that you may encounter, out in your daily life are like, wait, what? What do you do? I'm sorry, what? And I think it's obviously easier just to like, oh, I buy buildings. Like that's manageable to explain, but a lot of this stuff, when I covered credit default swaps, no, and that it was not an easy conversation starter. It was a really good conversation stopper, I would say, actually. But Planet Money's mission is to kind of enlighten people about these things, but to do it in a way where you don't notice. Where like you're on this ride and you're learning something, but it's not like you're eating just a bunch of broccoli. You're having fun. You're learning about people. You're having an emotional experience. Like it's fun and enjoyable to listen to. And I always kind of think about it as like it's like a caper. It's like an adventure. We need twists and turns. It can't just be like, oh, here's a news item. Typically, like what is the new, like what's going on in the news, and that freedom from the kind of grind of the news, I think is really another thing that makes it delightful. It truly is guided by what we think is interesting, important, and fun.
I didn't realize it came from This American Life. I've been listening to that podcast a good 10 years. And it also, I see the similarity in the storytelling. So is it the same producer or?
There's a lot of interchange, actually. A lot of the former Planet Money people are now at This American Life, and a lot of former This American Life people have been at Planet Money. Yeah. So.
Oh, good to know. Well, what will folks, since you talk about this learning and storytelling experience, I certainly felt that while reading Bond King. And so I know what I learned. What will most folks learn from reading it, after reading it?
Well, for normal people who are not, like, I feel like real estate is an interesting world where it both touches the finance industry and doesn't have to. It can kind of exist on both sides. And the thing that I think will be fun in this book for real estate professionals in particular is there's kind of a history of that intersection, right? Of, there's the first like real mortgage-backed security derivative in this book, the Ginnie Mae collateralized depository receipts, which is like, we were talking about this briefly before. This was the most fun and also the most challenging chapter for me to report out, in part because a lot of people forget, and it was such a small thing at the time. It was hard to track down the right people, but also it was so complicated. And this is a moment we're going to talk more about it later, but the world was still developing, and this wasn't like a common area of investment yet. And PIMCO really was a pioneer in that space. So I think for real estate professionals in particular, it should be a fun sort of history of, financialization of the housing market and of, buildings and development. But it also should be a window into what I think, we have this kind of idealized vision of our managerial class sometimes. And, a lot of the people watching may also have a window into this where like, I don't think that idealized vision is useful, helpful, or accurate. One thing reporting this book, I feel like I learned more about was like just how petty and small we can still be at any level of any company. There's like I was just rereading the section of the book that are like flame emails between top executives, and like I got physical anxiety reading it. Like it's just like, so, we've all received like a gnarly email from like a competitive peer or just somebody trying to be a jerk, and you're like, oh, like that to me I found very resonant and accessible. So it is this like emotional, very human story that at the end a little bit more about the bond market and the history of its creation.
It's interesting you talk about anxiety reading the book. I did feel a little because I've run departments and I've had an engineering firm and a staffing firm, and the employee interaction, as they say, is the hardest part. And it seemed like that was the case here. They were all brilliant, but their emotional intelligence could have been better. So could you explain a little bit about bonds? Most people on this phone know about it, but a little bit about the basics, and especially the correlation to real estate and real estate mortgages and how they parallel one another.
Yes, of course. It does feel a little bit like preaching to a choir, an unseen choir. So don't judge me. But yeah, bonds are just when one party lends money to another, with certain promises and obligations therein. And, the really fun part that, I didn't actually cover mortgage-backed securities when I was at Bloomberg, but I sat near our MBS reporters and they were like the baddest. They were so cool and like so well sourced and just told me all the gossip, and it was very fun. So um, I've always I think caught the bug of MBS from them. So basically, you can package mortgages. Mortgages are just bonds or just loans themselves, and you can package them, you can bundle them and slice them all up, as this may sound like familiar language from the financial crisis. But, slicing those up in terms of risk tolerance for investors and parceling them back out. And that's the kind of basic idea behind mortgage-backed securities. And yeah, I think the kind of the idea of handing over the keys too is a big one that features in the book, where in all of investing, in debt in particular, you have certain indentures and certain covenants, and at the end of the day you can take the assets, and that becomes kind of acutely relevant in the book when certain funds can't invest in physical buildings, certain funds can, and there's this moment of friction where one party is really interested in this deal that's a physical building deal, and I think those restrictions and the kind of understanding of how these different markets function, because they are so different. There's an auction-based market, there are like deep and liquid markets and treasuries, and these things operate super differently and seem to have their own languages that have developed over the decades.
So bonds are a big world. Why Bill Gross? Because he was indeed the king. Have you ever met him or interviewed him? Tell me more about your fascination with Mr. Gross.
Have interviewed him so much.
You have?
So much. Yes.
I thought he shied away from you and that this was sort of an
No.
unauthorized biography.
That was Muhammad Al-Arian. So Bill, yes, this is actually a common misperception, I will say. I think especially kind of in the wider world, people assume that Bill Gross wouldn't want me to tell this story because it was traumatic and embarrassing and whatever. And people thought that Muhammad Al-Arian would be very warm and friendly because that's his persona publicly. And in fact, and PIMCO people sort of knew that the inverse was true, that Bill Gross would be more interested in having his story put forward and would participate, and that Muhammad Al-Arian had more to lose and was far less interested in this book, in participating in it, and indeed did not participate for 7 years.
Oh, yes, I noticed in the book, all interaction was through his attorney. Yes. You have countless asterisks, and his attorney said this may or may not have happened.
Yes. Yes.
Has Mr. Gross commented on your book since it's come out?
Well, it's been interesting. So Mr. Gross actually ended up publishing his own Bond King, basically. He wrote a memoir, which he published 2 weeks before my book, which I take as a great compliment.
Indeed.
Yeah, I think what happened was, my fact checker sent over a list of facts to check in the summer of 2021. And I think, you can see the bones of a book from those facts, right? Like the adjectives are missing, but the kind of very, very bare facts are there. And I think he took one look at that and he was like, these are the facts that I like. This is not really what I wanted. And went ahead and wrote his own list of facts that he did like, which I think is great. And, of course, more power to him. But so he hasn't actually weighed in directly on my book. I did a Planet Money episode with a colleague about my book, and kind of it was sort of funny when we published it. He replied to my tweet about the episode with a link to his own book.
Oh,
he is
a promoter.
He's incorrigible. Yeah, it was amazing. So he remains on brand. But yeah, he hasn't sued me, which I also take as a great compliment.
Well, I don't know if the following question I'm allowed to ask, and it's not a question I gave you in advance. But if you are sued, you don't have to answer.
Exciting.
Would NPR back all your expenses? I mean,
it's actually Macmillan would,
sorry.
Provided I made no misrepresentations to my publisher, it would be my publisher that would back. I mean, if the episode, not the book, had a misrepresentation or was the subject of the suit, then that would be NPR. But in the case that it's the book, it would be the publisher.
Okay, yeah. Well, I'm glad you've got backing.
Thank you. Me too.
So let's go into that very complicated Ginnie Mae trade.
The best one.
Yeah, maybe explain to the audience a little background just as a teaser for the book, and just how I think it was one of the first of its kind, or the first of its kind.
Exactly. Yeah, it was I think the earliest derivative tied to mortgages. And I just, it's hard to strike the right level of complexity in these conversations. I want to just note that I did not answer your what is a bond question. But it is
Oh,
kind of I don't even know what I said. But the Ginnie Mae contract is really fascinating because it was born kind of at the beginning of derivatives, and it's when we were still figuring things out, figuring out what would work, how many different levers and how many different paths, I'm struggling to not say options, could be or should be embedded in these contracts so that it would be attractive enough that people would actually trade them, but not so attractive that they would be like a slam dunk for one party or the other, right? Like you don't want it to be like such a one-sided market. You want to make it two-sided. You want a two-way market. So, and the creator of these Ginnie Mae CDRs was actually a guy, Dr. Richard Sandor, who is still around. He's at Chicago and he's working on a LIBOR alternative replacement thing. So that is pretty fun. So this new contract basically had too much optionality is the long and short of it. It had two main levers and it's ended up being kind of a two-pronged trade for PIMCO. But the coolest part, the less interesting part, but that makes it very attractive or made it attractive and convenient for PIMCO was that it had a perpetual coupon. It could convert into a perpetual security that paid an 8% coupon. And at the time, rates were extremely high but going down. So if you wanted kind of a floor for this investment, there it was. And the other much cooler part, in my opinion, is this it basically said that you could convert to physical. And this was, this is a normal-ish thing. And people kind of forget about physical delivery and physical settlement, especially in the early days when people hadn't really done it.
What does that mean, convert to physical?
So basically with an option, you can demand, instead of rolling to a new option or closing out the contract, you can demand settlement via the underlying security. You can say, hey, thanks so much for your time. I'd like the treasury that we've been betting on here. I'd like the, whatever security. And that's the cheapest to deliver, right? So whichever security of this prescribed pool is the cheapest to deliver into that physical settlement, that's the one that you get. And the thing that's so cool about this is there wasn't this robust market that we have now. Rates had been really high. So there were a whole bunch of high coupon Ginnie Mae. And if you recall, negative convexity means that those are not quite as valuable as the lower coupon, but rates were falling. So the idea was that if PIMCO had a big enough position in these CDRs, they could basically, I don't want to say corner the market, but if they forced settlement, physical settlement, their counterparties would have to deliver the cheapest to deliver, right? Just normal stuff. And there were only so many of those cheapest to deliver high coupon Ginnie Mae's at the time. The window for those being minted was over because rates were falling. So that universe was suddenly prescribed, was finite all of a sudden, and PIMCO could kind of outsize it. So they bought enough contracts of the CDRs to basically outsize, to wag the dog, if you will, of the cheapest to deliver underlying Ginnie Mae. So that's what they did. And counterparties were totally surprised and had to hand over their lower and lower coupon Ginnie Mae's, which were, I think one guy told me, just like gold to us at PIMCO.
And that was 1983, everyone. So it was almost 40 years ago. And yeah, people just did not have these kinds of mechanisms. How much did PIMCO make? Do you recall?
Oh, I think they didn't actually make that much from a dollar. The gross notional at the peak was $2 billion on the trade, and they only made $70 million in profit.
I see.
But the thing that actually happened here was, and I'm stepping on the reveals here, I apologize, but there were a number of sort of intangible benefits of this. One, it established their reputation very aggressively in the market. So, I ran into a guy at a luncheon in 2017 who was like, oh, did you hear about the Ginnie Mae CDR trade? And I was like, hello, sir, nice to meet you. It needed to, it was such an event for him. And he was like, oh man, they really got it. So I think having that reputation as being that fierce and that kind of smart and in the weeds and able to just rip your face off and you're never going to know until they settle, that I think was very powerful for them and helped to kind of pave the way. They also were very early to being able to use derivatives in basically pension funds. So because they lobbied their clients to allow them to do this trade, they could use derivatives more and with enthusiasm more than their peers for a long time. And I think that was very lucrative for them as well.
Goodness gracious, that's a lot of information. Folks, read the details in the book. No, I got about 60% of it.
I'm telling you, it's my favorite part. I'm so glad we're talking about it.
I sense the energy for sure.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of being ahead of their time, they did call the 2007-08 real estate recession, did they not?
They did.
And what kind of moves did they make without spilling too many beans about it? Please hold
Oh,
back as much as
well,
you think.
a lot of us were there for it. And also someone pointed out to me that there's a terrible spoiler in the tagline of the book. So I feel like spoilers, when you write a nonfiction book, it kind of comes with the territory. But yeah, so they basically saw that in 2007, home prices were getting to a point where the next buyer was just like no one. And that at some point things would have to turn around. And in kind of seeing this, they ratcheted down how much risk they took in the market very broadly. So that means, triple B and lower bonds. They just started kind of backing off the riskier stuff and kind of going to the higher ground and not investing in things that were related to mortgages. And for, I don't know, a couple months to over a year, this meant that they underperformed the market. The party was still raging and they had already left. So they just were like twiddling their thumbs, waiting for things to turn. And one thing that I actually really like and kind of admire about the way they traded this, a lot of the like famous big trades that we hear about are like so splashy and cool, but they're very lucky that they worked out. Like there's this one Wall Street Journal article that I love that I talk about all the time, mostly to myself, where there was this one guy that got in a motorcycle accident. And because he got in a motorcycle accident, his medical bills were so high that he couldn't pay his mortgage. And because he couldn't pay his mortgage, his was the last payment in the like chain of payments in the bundle of securities that defaulted in order to give John Paulson his $1 billion trade. And like, what? Like this one guy. So John Paulson benefited from this one guy getting in a motorcycle accident. Like that's crazy. And I feel like the lesson from that is life is bananas, but also that trade very nearly didn't work out, right? Like, and the Michael Burry trade was very heavily keyed to time. And what PIMCO did was basically create a trade that kind of could weather the downturn, but then also pick up the other side and was so much less keyed to time and so much less dependent on the winds going in the right direction. So, it's a better information ratio. It's a better kind of risk profile and a more informed risk, I think. Not to praise PIMCO too much, sorry.
Well, it seems like they certainly did well there, but they did something that was a little ethically challenged on the real estate side in Richmond, where I won't explain this as well as you, but I believe the city was trying to, via eminent domain, get these properties. Right. And you want to pick up the story. And Richmond is, many people in this call live in the Bay Area, so they may even remember it.
Yeah, this was a really cool idea. I think it's cool, but I think maybe the audience might think it's terrifying. So I'm very interested in opinions here. But you're right. Yeah, the idea that the city put forward was to use eminent domain to buy those underwater mortgages. Like so many people were still struggling with their home loans and paying their mortgages in the aftermath of the recession and hadn't recovered in the same way that Wall Street and the financial industry had. So the city was trying to figure out, what do we do? It was like 600 mortgages. It really wasn't that many, actually. And so they were like, okay, this kind of interesting and radical plan. Why can't we buy these mortgages at the current market price with eminent domain, using eminent domain, and then basically revalue the mortgages at that price. So like if you bought it at 100 and now it's trading at 60, congrats, it's at 60. So, this was a radical idea that would have enabled those homeowners to no longer be underwater and maybe be able to sell their house and move somewhere else, or kind of reinvigorate those people's, personal balance sheets. And PIMCO, BlackRock, every mortgage investor just absolutely freaked out. They were like, this undermines the integrity of the entire mortgage market. There's just no way, if you do this, we can't buy mortgage-backed securities anymore, because you could all of a sudden decide that a thing worth 100 is worth 60. So the objections, I think, are interesting and valid, but it was a really cool idea, I think.
That's really cool. So it did not happen. Did it happen anywhere?
I don't think so. What ended up happening was we got a lot of Federal Reserve support, and those underwater mortgages became regular water.
I've never heard the term regular water.
Yes, we just coined it.
Oh, you heard it here first, UCLA.
Hashtag.
So you get a lot of intimate details, and one of my favorite stories is the interaction between Mohammed El-Arian, the #1 guy for a while, with his daughter, where he's sort of revisiting how hard he's working. and he's going back and forth with her about her not brushing her teeth. How do you get this information in general terms? That's just one anecdote.
Yeah. Well, one thing that helped me a lot with this book, and which was reassuring at the outset when I was worried about whether people would talk to me. It's always a concern as a journalist if the primary subjects of your book will talk to you at all, right? Or your whatever story. And in this case, Bill and Muhammad had been public figures for so long, especially Bill. There was just like a treasure trove of existing information. So that story, actually, Muhammad Al-Arian wrote and published that himself. He published it, I want to say, for like Time or Worth.com or something. I'm forgetting what outlet it was. But that was his own writing that I could then draw from, which was really interesting too, because Muhammad didn't want to talk to me, didn't want to be a part of the book, but he'd written so much and said so much publicly that I could kind of reconstruct, corroborated with talking to his friends or his coworkers or other people who were with him at the time, to kind of synthetically recreate his experience. And I think it was a big help to me, just especially in that case. And I'm so glad that it came through as feeling that intimate and that kind of, that you're in the room with them. But that also speaks to, they're also great communicators, both of them, Bill and Muhammad. They both, spent a long time doing it and do create, both of them, very vivid. They write very well and write vivid things that I could just I'm like, thank you so much. This beautiful scene, beginning of the chapter.
Yes. Bill Gross's was a monthly update. What did he call his chronicle?
Investment Outlook, yes.
Yeah, and that was more of a personal reflection on the market than a numerical one or a quantitative one. But he indeed a great writer. And whenever I hear Al-Arian on the radio, it's very soothing. I feel like I've been through a meditative session or something. Let's see. Can we talk a little bit about Bill Gross's resignation? I was shocked that there was no real succession plan. It was all, we got this.
I know, right?
Bill's going to live forever, or he's going to leave when we want him to. And then maybe we'll talk about the lack of succession plan and the impact on the markets that it had. It was pretty significant.
Yeah, it's really wild to think about in retrospect, but at the time it was really seen as this potentially seismic thing, like this could upend financial markets, and this could be the big thing that we've been worried about since the crisis, the financial crisis. Because I think that, PIMCO is enormous and there are a lot of investors within it, but Bill's word was kind of the final word. So, he had been such an enthusiastic supporter and buyer of, Brazilian debt, for example, that literally when people saw that he was leaving, they were like, we need to sell Brazilian debt. Like, no one's going to be there. Like, no one loved Brazilian debt more than Bill Gross. Like, we need to get out. So there was this very strong sense. And people thought that trillions of dollars would leave PIMCO. Okay, maybe not trillions, but they thought billions and billions and billions and you know what I mean? So there's this huge anxiety that we're going to see a flood of money in one direction out of this company. And we need to, that could have potentially huge ramifications. So I think you're right. The lack of a succession plan, I think the problem that people run into, and you see this across the financial industry, it's really hard to do. Like, these founders end up being so successful in building these successful companies because they're micromanagers and they are control freaks and they have a hard time letting go. And I think the client side too, there's this kind of double-edged, you're like, I love this guy, I'm invested because of this guy, but I also need to know what's going to happen if he gets hit by a bus, God forbid. So these key man risks, you do have to manage around them, but it's so difficult and it causes such fractious, terrible conflict at the top of these firms, which is itself incredibly difficult to navigate. So I do think that that was a huge oversight, but I think most financial firms really do struggle with it, even established ones,
Still to this day.
Oh yeah, I mean, Apollo's just having a very ugly time of it. Bridgewater, Ray just stepped back. There are just examples. Even a stable looking place like JP Morgan, I think Jamie Dimon's notorious for always shooting his number two person, not literally. And and that's there's a way that's useful for him, because then he's not, there's no one threatening his kind of leadership there, and there's no one. It makes him more powerful, but it's also, I think, short-sighted. I'm not a CEO, so clearly one of us has more experience.
Most MBA programs would agree that it's short-sighted, and I think anybody on this Zoom would agree. And I'm enjoying the fact that you're obviously on a first-name basis with a lot of CEOs. I've heard a lot of
They might disagree, so.
Oh, of course they wouldn't. So this is a bit of a sensitive subject, but you in a few areas you discuss about the lack of diversity in executive ranks at firms such as
Absolutely.
this. And I always make fun of going south of the Orange Curtain when I drive into Irvine from where I live in Long Beach.
Yes.
So maybe comment on that. Maybe if Black Lives Matter and other programs have helped bring this to a head, if you think your book has made a difference in that regard, or if there are some if there's some improvements, or first talk about what it was like at PIMCO, what you think's going to happen in that regard.
Yeah. Well, so little mini anecdote. I spoke at the Morningstar Investment Conference and I talked about my experience in Orange County, which was just like I found it somewhat chilling and like a cultural desert, and I didn't love it. And I should note that I'm talking about like wealthy white Orange County, and I know that there are other cool things in Orange County, but to your point about the Orange Curtain, and then I was told later that there were entire tables of like PIMCO people or Orange County people that were like grumbling and hate me now, so I apologize.
Oh, there's
But
Orange County on this call, so
yes, hello Orange
apologize
County.
from Long Beach
It's
as well.
so
Apologies from
beautiful.
Long
I
Beach.
do like the scenery. Um, I don't know. I found it tough. And PIMCO itself is, there are the odd, woman or person of color pretty high up, and some of them are like incredibly, amazing, and you run into a couple of them, but not all of them, I should note, in the book, and there have been throughout its history. And I get on a little bit of a high horse in the book about Pat Podlick, formerly Pat Fisher, who was, I think, the forgotten co-founder of PIMCO. And this
What
wasn't
was Pat's role?
what wasn't Pat's role? So she was the head of operations and like the back office, and for a while HR and payroll, and she ran the cash desk, and she like basically ran that Ginnie Mae, like the logistics of the Ginnie Mae mortgage trade.
Right, I
Like just
remember that. Yeah.
yeah, she just was in everything. And like I know the back office and like operation stuff can tend to be, that's more typically where you find women in the financial industry, and it's also sort of looked down upon as part of the business. I think the people are always like, oh, I came up from operations, as if it's like this drudgery, this like slut, you had to like really fight your way out. And like you do have to fight your way out, but on the flip side, when you spin it out into a company, then you're Michael Bloomberg. So it's a little bit a double, I don't know, there's a bit of a double standard there where it's like subordinated and not looked on favorably until it becomes a multi-billion-dollar empire. So yeah, I was frustrated in writing this book because I thought I would run into more women and people of color, or be able to weave that element of it into the book, into the plot, that it would be relevant, and it just wasn't, which was like kind of annoying, because it's like, I care about that stuff a lot, and sort of it's self-evident maybe that of course they wouldn't be integrated in the plot and the narrative engine of this book, because they were intentionally kept from the power center, like that's the point of discrimination, and that's like the of course I probably could have assumed that. And I think it's worth noting that, a lot of people presented Ilarion to me as like the villain of the book. And it's really notable that he's like one of the very few people of color. So that did reach those top ranks. And I don't know, I find it, PIMCO is not that much worse than a lot of financial organizations, right? Like we know that. And I think it's a pretty widespread problem, not just in finance, obviously. But they had not had a Black partner in their 50 years until 2021, I think. And that's just like, you couldn't find one. I know that there were Black people working at this firm, and just none of it. Like, if you think it's a meritocracy, that we live in a meritocracy, and further to the point that PIMCO is a meritocracy, that your company's a meritocracy, and you have not one Black person in your partner pool, like, you have to know something about yourself. You have to be able to look at those two facts and know something like that. Those can't line up if you're not racist. So I think.
Wow. Do you think they put in intentional barriers to people of color and women to rise in their ranks?
I don't know that it has to be intentional, right? It's almost
true.
I think that it's I'm sure there were some people where it was intentional. That's just the world we live in, but I'm also sure that it wasn't. I'm sure people were good-hearted and thought that they were doing the right thing, and good-hearted people can still be racist and sexist, and good-hearted people can think that they're not those things and really be trying to help and still cause, problems. So I don't know. It's such a tough area and tough thing to make progress on in our society. So I certainly don't want to say that, PIMCO's like the worst of the worst. They're not. That's a terrible competition to win. But I think that, you know, they experience a lot of the problems that we all do. It's just that the stakes are so high because the dollar figures are so high.
Right.
So
well, it's a very important commentary. I appreciate you touching on that with me. And folks listening, if you want to send some questions, we're winding down. Feel free. And I did want to talk a little bit about the end of your subtitle, which is "and lost it all." And I'm reading this. What do you mean lost it all? He's still a billionaire.
I get this a lot.
Married again. Seems happy. How did he lose it all?
Well, so in my view, you know, I wrote this book very much thinking, I kind of talk about it like method reporting, where I try to like embody the person's worldview and like enter the jungle of their mind and like think how they think. And that's what I was thinking when I wrote that. You know, he worked so hard to preserve his commute, his legacy, his empire, his job, all of these things, and he lost it all. So to me, you know, yeah, he lost his empire of PIMCO, but he also, his marriage fell apart. His relationship with his son fell apart.
That was very sad. Yes.
It was horribly sad. And I don't know. Yeah, he still has money. He's reinventing himself, and good for him. Like, I think that's wonderful. And I think that it's like, frankly, a little bit inspiring. But to me, it's all the things that he cared about, that he'd worked so hard to create over the course of his life and preserve. And those things, in particular, his reputation, you know, his standing, I think, has changed. And that kind of goes to the question that I sneakily already looked at, that I think those, like, money isn't everything. And I think that, you know, to me, yeah, he's not destitute, but money is fungible. So what does he really have? Like, it's not that special. Sorry.
And I agree, and I think other people on this Zoom have read the stories, have heard the stories whereby they're defining happiness, and there's a happiness threshold at a certain income, and after that, there really you're happy. There's no correlation between happiness and more money. And this book was worth reading for many reasons, but one of my favorite stories, and I'm not going to go into great detail, all the locals here probably heard this, where very wealthy people were arguing about sound and building structures, and just the legal spat that ensued is worth the story, everyone. We've got a question, and I'll read it verbatim, but it touches on exactly what we're discussing. Given Bill's remarkable investing performance, developing the PIMCO business, coupled with a disastrous last few years and ultimate exit, do you think his legacy is perceived as positive, negative, or more likely somewhere in between?
I agree with the questioner that it's somewhere in between. I think there are still people absolutely who revere him, who don't think that those final chapters, well, he's still with us, so he has more chapters to do, but those latest chapters are, you know, they don't regard them, and they don't give them the same weight as they do the earlier chapters, which maybe that's right. You know, like, he did do such big things, and maybe we have a bit of a recency bias and are overweighting the more recent stuff. But yeah, I had a kind of an annoying time writing this book because I kept having to rewrite the ending because he kept doing more stuff. And like, he would just be out there, like, Bill. Honestly, I was like, can you hold still for like 5 minutes or 7 years? But yeah, I would be at dinner parties and trying to, they're like, oh, what's your book? And I'm like telling them, and they're like, is that the guy who left dead fish in his wife's house? And I'm like, that is how he's known right now. Isn't that the case? Like, I gotta change the ending. Like, I can't write a whole book about this guy and just ignore that. So that was annoying for me personally, but I think more so for him. I do think that really, you know, the personal stuff aside, his trading record at Janus really just wasn't, you know, didn't cover him in glory. And I think that was extremely painful for him and really sad. Yeah, it cost his legacy a lot. And that's a bummer. I think it just sucks.
Brilliant man, indeed. So let's talk a little bit about sort of the wider range of people you've interviewed. How many people do you think you've interviewed in your career?
Literally thousands, tens of. Great question.
I always like doing my own mini interviews. I go to conferences and the like, and sort of a strange story. I'm always trying to find out who is really happy with what they're doing.
Yeah.
And then I keep on reading reports of, this is going to sound weird, cartoonists when they die. You know those And then I talk to my artist friends about that, and I say, yeah, they're very happy. You know, they've got their network of friends. They don't really care about money. It's all about the art, but they've made enough such that they're going to be fine till the day they end. So of all the people in professions you've researched and interviewed, who or what profession appears to be most emotionally stable and happy?
It's almost nowhere in the finance industry, I regret to tell you. I know. Also, the only tech people that seem well adjusted are the early ones that had fun in like the pre-internet, you know, like when they were just
working out of
trying things out.
garages and
Quite, yeah, just like, I don't know, is this a thing? Let's try it. Oh my God, I invented the URL. Like that, those people are like awesome and like don't care about anything because their patents made, you know, they don't have to worry about money. I talked to there's one person I talked to in this book. There are like 3 people who left PIMCO with their head still on straight, and they're very happy. You know, I think Scott Simon is somewhat famously happy. He's a real estate, you know, mortgage-backed guy, and somehow he just enjoys his life in a way that I think a lot of other PIMCO people are not able to access that door. I don't know. I mean, I think like ad people aren't miserable. I don't interview them much for my job, but I also was thinking about this. It's such a good question. And I was thinking like, I talk to a lot of economists and they're less miserable than like finance people or less mean. Like my life has been improved by talking to economists more than finance. Sorry. But I do think that's confusing because a PhD is so miserable and being an academic is so miserable. So I'm a little bit confused how that is. Maybe they're just like, maybe it's a survivorship bias thing where the ones that make it that far are just cheerful.
Are there any finance folks that want to comment in the Q&A bar?
I'm so sorry.
We'd love to hear from you.
Guys.
Or any Orange County people that need to retort.
Are you happy? You could be.
These guys.
Oh yeah, the audience. Yeah, no, we don't need to do
perpetually happy. Yeah, no therapy allowed. So I know you're not a prognosticator while folks are thinking of their questions here, but you talk to so many prognosticators, so many people who move the needle in our economy. What are your thoughts on whether we're in a recession now, we're about to enter a recession, soft landing, hard landing, 1929 again? What are you hearing?
The somewhat universal diagnosis that I think I am not going to try to be contrarian here is that yeah, we're probably heading into a recession if we aren't already. I mean, I don't feel like we're already in one personally, but sometimes these things lag, right? Like, you know, we have such like the labor market's still pretty good, like unemployment's still quite low. There are a lot of ways in which we are looking healthy, like industrial, but on the flip side, you know, I think like something like 98% of CEOs feel pretty down and think that we're heading into one. I think Fitch Ratings was like, yeah, second quarter 2023, here we go. So the
what
consensus does appear. Oh, Fitch Ratings. So there are 3 main rating firms: Fitch, S&P, and Moody's.
Moody's. Okay,
yeah,
I never hear Fitch. I always hear S&P, Moody's.
Ouch! Wow. Sorry, Fitch. No, yeah, they're in there, and they just, I think, somewhat recently issued a thing saying that we're likely to have a recession in the second quarter of, I think it's second quarter of 2023. So, you know, as a journalist, yes, we try to avoid. We just write down what other people say. So I'm doing that here, but it does look like the Fed's unlikely to pivot and yet again trying to err on the side of doing too much.
What other projects are you working on that this audience can look forward to?
Well, I'm working on a thing at Planet Money that has really, I don't know if any of you are video game creators in your spare time, but I tried to make a Federal Reserve video game where I wanted to tell the whole history of the Federal Reserve and how they acquired all of their different tools through the kind of frame of a video game. So you'd be like, you know, you're the Fed, that's the, you know, it's a single role-playing game, and you're, you know, Ben Bernanke or whoever, and you're like, boop, 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 like move through this universe and okay, you have a tool, it's quantitative easing. This is way harder than I expected. This idea is maybe a bad one. So I've been working on that.
Who's your target audience?
No, I know. That's a fair question. Everyone, it's Planet Money, anybody. Yeah. Yeah. So
all right. Well, feel free to test it on UCLA when it comes out. We'll send it out to 10,000 folks on the email list locally. It's obviously
That's
much
kind.
larger nationwide, and we'll give it a shot. Or we'll send it to the Happy Economist at
Yeah.
the UCLA MBA program and keep it away from the finance people.
No, I feel bad now. Finance people are great too. I just find that they are more anxious, I think, because you can never rest, right? You're always on guard for whatever the market's going to throw at you. For all the prognosticating in the world, you can't always predict when Russia's going to invade another country or whatever. So I do think there's just a natural baseline of stress. And that can be corrosive. So, and a lot of these firms do have terrible cultures that I think are hard to live in. So I don't want to demean my wonderful sources and all the people in finance, because I do think there are a lot of fantastic people. Now I feel really bad. Sorry, everyone.
So I got a note here. Please create a replay for those of us who arrived late. Well, I would like you to know that this is being recorded. So all you tardy folks will get to see this on the REAG website. And another question, I'm going to read it verbatim. You must have interviewed hundreds of CEOs. What are the signs that they're lying or just being unrealistic, either knowingly or unknowingly? Well,
Oh, I love that. Okay, that's such a great question. Thank you. A couple things. I found in some cases when you really know what you're talking about, mostly just knowing what you're talking about, I think is the easiest tell. Before I do that, there's a study from Stanford that shows that if you that like CEOs are more likely to use words like terrific and stupendous and fantastic and like oversell if they're lying on a quarterly earnings call. So if there's something coming down the pike, if they're like, oh, things are terrific. So that's a quite a good study that I think is pretty fun and is a good quick answer. But there's like a fake pensiveness sometimes when they're like, oh, I don't know, I've never thought about that. Like I'm thinking of one CEO in particular where I asked him about diversity data and he was like, I certainly don't know. And like they know. I know that they know for like from reporting and researching it, like factually they do know, but also like just realistically as like he definitely, and I don't know if he knew that I had that he knew, I have no idea, but he put on a little play for me and it was like kind of annoying. But I think mostly like I'm thinking of this other time that I stopped a CEO and tried to ask about this like particular bond market thing. Like there was some like myth in the bond market that this was affecting that and that it was a bad thing. We all needed to worry about this one random thing, about obviously in some way related to liquidity. It was when everyone was talking about liquidity all the time. And I asked the CEO the question and he was like, and he just kind of blinked at me a couple times and then he just answered a completely different question. And I realized I don't think he understood my question. So I think what that revealed to me was that like he had no idea. And in some cases,
they can't say that.
Yeah, he can't just say that. And sometimes you have like a figurehead CEO who's like the branding marketing guy and doesn't care about the details, and that's one thing. And then you have people who just don't get it or just don't know or I don't know. And that I find so much more concerning. But I think, when you know your stuff, you can smell when people are lying or don't know.
And Mary Childs, you know your stuff. This has been
sometimes.
Delightful.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Did you want to have any concluding remarks you'd like to share with the group? Putting you on the spot.
I know, quite. No, this has been super fun. And thank you for letting me talk in particular about the Ginnie Mae trade. I apologize for demeaning the finance profession. But no, I appreciate the time and the audience. This has been super fun.
It's been a sincere pleasure. I've learned a lot. And I look forward to pitching you some ideas.
Great.
And everyone go out and buy Bond King. Again, this will be put on the UCLA REAG website in about 2 weeks. Thank you again, Mary Childs. Everyone have an incredibly safe and fun weekend.
And send me your Planet Money ideas.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
How do they do that?
Oh, email me, mchilds@npr.org.
mchilds@npr.org. Take care, everyone.